boys and girls, I got some true stories to tell. You're back outside, but they still lied. Whoa, yeah. Take off the foo-foo, take off the cloud chase, take off the Wi-Fi, take off the money phone, take off the car loan, take off the flex and the white loss, take off the weird jewelry. I'ma take 10 steps, then I'm taking off top 5. Take off them fabricate streams and the microwave memes. It's a real world outside. Take off your idols, take off the runway, take off the Cairo, take off the Sandro pay, 5-day stay, take a $250,000, hella final. Take off the fuck flag, take off perception, take off the cop with the iPad. Take off the allure, take off the unsure, take off decisions I lack. Take off the fake deep, take off the fake woke, take off the I'm broke, I care. Take off the gossip, take off the new logic that if I'm rich, I'm rare. Take off the should know, take off the doje, take off the Birkin bag. Take all that designer off and what do you have? You ugly, you out of pocket. 2 ATMs, you stepping to what? You out of pocket. Who you think they talk about us? You out of pocket. Who you think they carry up for us? The world in a panic, the women is stranded, the men on the run. The profits abandoned, the law take advantage, the market is crashing, the industry wants to sleep in the box while they making a mockery following us. This ain't monopoly, watching for love. This ain't monogamy, y'all get involved. Jumping on what the hell is that? I gotta relax when I feel. All my descendants, they come in my sleep and say I am too real. I'm done with the sensitive, taking it personal. Done with the black and the white, the wrong and the right. You hoping for change and miracles. I know the feelings that came with burials, cries. You ugly, you out of pocket. 2 ATMs, you stepping to what? You out of pocket. Who you think they talk about us? You out of pocket. Who you think they carry up for us? Serving up for love, dancing in a drop. Hello to the big step, but never lose a count.
Choose the team you want to start your franchise with. Continue ahead to begin your franchise. Use the options on the left to edit league settings or change your role to a player or owner.
The government taxing my funds in the bank. Homies subtracting the fix when I'm breaking. Look at my reaction, my pupils on skates. Holla.
Let's think about this for a second. Tell me what you would do for status. When you show your show, no credit. When you show your bro for leverage.
What a hypocrite said. What community feel they the only ones relevant? What a hypocrite said. What community feel they the only ones relevant? You out of pocket, yeah, you out of pocket. You entertain the mediocre, need to stop it. You entertaining old friends when they toxic. What your life like, you gossip. What the fuck is council culture, dog? Say what I want about you, I'm like Oprah, dog. I treat you like I'm Jigga, watch I own it all. Oh, you worry about a critic, that ain't protocol.
With the next selection, the Carolina Panthers on the clock. Now on the clock, the Texans.
I just scraped it off the top, cut it out the road, out the curve, out the block. I was already told I don't work by 10 o'clock.
The Arizona Cardinals are now on the clock. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts are on the clock. The Seattle Seahawks are now on the clock. It's the Detroit Lions now on the clock. The Las Vegas Raiders now on the clock. With the next selection, the Falcons are on the clock. Now we turn to the Eagles. They're on the clock. It's the Tennessee Titans now on the clock.
But you scared to put on your hoodie, man. My like Woody.
Next up, the Jets are on the clock. Next up, the Patriots are on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Green Bay Packers. With the next selection, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's the Bucs now on the clock.
100 carats on my neck, my boy. That 100 bunny rabbits trying to get my boy.
Now on the clock, the Los Angeles Chargers.
is gorillas. Let me check, my boy. Say nothing silly, you regret,
the Minnesota
my boy.
Vikings
We got bananas
now on the clock.
My boy.
With the next
And I
pick,
can send it
the
in the text,
Jacksonville
my boy.
Jaguars
Thumbs
are
up
on the
emoji
clock.
with the flex, my boy.
On the clock now,
Personalize every
the
breath,
Dallas
my boy.
Cowboys.
Tone free. That's the wreck, my boy. And if you need a couple,
Next up,
I'm the
the
connect,
Cincinnati
my boy,
Bengals
off the
are
top.
on the clock.
Off the top, cut it on the road, on the curb,
The Philadelphia Eagles on the clock now. With the next pick, the Kansas City Chiefs are now on the clock.
do what I gotta do. I'm moving with you.
The Pittsburgh Steelers are now on the clock. The Houston Texans are now on the clock. The Colts now on the clock. On the clock now, the Seattle Seahawks. The Las Vegas Raiders are on the clock. The Carolina Panthers now on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Tennessee Titans. The Green Bay Packers are now on the clock. It's the New England Patriots now on the clock. Next up, it's the Packers on the clock. With the next selection, it's the Washington Commanders. The Pittsburgh Steelers on the clock now. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are on the clock. Next up, it's the Dolphins on the clock. It's the Bears now on the clock. With the next selection, the Lions are on the clock. The New York Giants on the clock. It's the Buffalo Bills now on the clock. On the clock now, the Chicago Bears. On the clock now, the Kansas City Chiefs. On the clock now, the Houston Texans. Next up, it's the Broncos on the clock. On the clock now, the Los Angeles Rams. On the clock now, it's the Atlanta Falcons. On the clock now, the New England Patriots. The Tennessee Titans are now on the clock. The Green Bay Packers are on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Green Bay Packers. It's the Steelers now on the clock. Next up, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Miami Dolphins. With the next selection, the Ravens are on the clock. The Jaguars are on the clock. Now on the clock, the Giants. The Buffalo Bills are now on the clock. It's the Carolina Panthers now on the clock. The Kansas City Chiefs now on the clock. The Chicago Bears are on the clock now. On the clock now, the Houston Texans. It's now the Indianapolis Colts selection. The New England Patriots are now on the clock. It's the Atlanta Falcons now on the clock. The New Orleans Saints are now on the clock. With the next selection, the Browns are on the clock. Next up, the Patriots are on the clock. Next up, the Commanders are on the clock. On the clock now, the Detroit Lions. Next up, it's the Seahawks on the clock. The Los Angeles Chargers now on the clock. It's the Cleveland Browns now on the clock. And now on the clock, it's the 49ers.
You can label me a Huey P. Made a martyr out of
Bills now on the clock. The Panthers are on the clock. The Chicago Bears are now on the clock. It's the Bears now on the clock. Now on the clock, the Texans.
I was asked a question and the asker thought it hard. If I was facing death and I could
The
ask
Indianapolis Colts are now on the clock.
And to be rightfully celebrated as a child of God.
Next up, the Cleveland Browns are on the clock. With the next pick, the Raiders are on the clock. On the clock now, the New Orleans Saints. The Cleveland Browns are now on the clock. On the clock now, the Baltimore Ravens. The Washington Commanders are now on the clock. The Detroit Lions now on the clock. Now the Seattle Seahawks are on the clock. The Chargers are up now. They're on the clock. And now on the clock, the Minnesota Vikings. The New York Giants are now on the clock. On the clock now, the Buffalo Bills. The San Francisco 49ers are now on the clock.
Kind of suit reflect the struggle that they put us through with the strength to fight
The
the power like
Chiefs
to be
are
the
on the clock.
insight to be equal.
With the
No,
next
sky
pick,
needed a
the
voice to
Miami
find
Dolphins
reason to
are
multiply.
on the
People
clock.
in the streets for the cause, marching on Washington miners
The
will be walking
Cardinals
through walls.
on the
Like a
clock
superhero
now.
show up when ain't no one to call. That'll shield you from them shields that been killing us all. High view
It's
for
the
eyes,
Detroit
the people,
Lions
the villains,
now
the dog.
on the
Power
clock.
of resolution for a war
The
with
Los
evil
Angeles
stars.
Rams
The knowledge
are
of
up.
real and war where
They're
they live
on
and
the
taking
clock.
up the kids and the older folk. The queen cause they needed
Next
most.
up,
Politics with
the
king.
Titans
A body
are
cannot
on the
vote.
clock.
PTSD.
It's the
Cause
New
mental
England
health ain't a joke.
Patriots
Feed the hungry
now
and
on
dope.
the
Everyone
clock.
would know everywhere we go. Every block, every hood, every city, every ghetto.
Now on the clock, the Rams. On the clock now, the Jacksonville Jaguars. On the clock now, the New England Patriots. The Los Angeles Rams now on the clock. Now on the clock, the Washington Commanders. With the next selection, the Lions are on the clock. The Seattle Seahawks are now on the clock. With the next pick, the Kansas City Chiefs are now on the clock. The Baltimore Ravens now on the clock. The Houston Texans are now on the clock. On the clock now, the Houston Texans. Now on the clock, it's the Las Vegas Raiders. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts are on the clock. On the clock now, the Houston Texans. The Jaguars are on the clock now. The New York Giants on the clock. On the clock now, the Chicago Bears. It's the Philadelphia Eagles now on the clock. The Colts, now on the clock. The 49ers, on the clock now. The Green Bay Packers are now on the clock. On the clock now, the Kansas City Chiefs. It's the New Orleans Saints, now on the clock. It's the Tennessee Titans, now on the clock. On the clock now, it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Next up, it's the Packers on the clock. With the next selection, it's the Washington Commanders.
Hey,
on the clock
DJ
now,
Bosky, let's get
the
it.
Los Angeles Rams.
We the champions. Here
It's
in
now
Los Angeles.
the Indianapolis
We
Colts
doing
selection.
numbers.
Now
Bring it
on
on,
the
victory,
clock,
straight out
the
puddle.
Texans.
I'm at the plug, introduced to my brothers. My squad superior, ain't none above us. We doing numbers.
On the clock now,
Gang in
it's the
building, we
Los
taking
Angeles
it over. Call the
Chargers.
promoters. I just put up in this thing with my soldiers.
With the
I
next
blew it,
selection,
and I'm still
it's the Pittsburgh
passing it out like
Steelers.
this. Call up Khalifa. Brand new in the. You know I stay with
Now
some bad,
on the
bad
clock,
TGOD,
the
baby, you know
Giants.
that's a gang gang. Crazy girls after
The
the
Miami
game.
Dolphins now on the clock. The Atlanta Falcons are now on the clock.
We get awards, but we get God the glory.
Now
I'm shooting
on
my
the
shot
clock,
most times
the
I be
San
scoring. Do this
Francisco
for my city. I've been on the
49ers.
trophy, feel like Freddie Mercury. We the champions. Here in
With
Los
the
Angeles.
next selection, the
doing
Falcons are on the clock.
Bring it home victory, straight out the huddle. I'm at the plug, introduced to my brothers. My squad superior, ain't none above us. We doing numbers. Gang in the building, we taking it up.